Every year, the Greater Golden Horseshoe adds tens of thousands of newcomers, while other parts of the province struggle just to keep the residents they currently have. Already, such outflows for those communities mean labor shortages and declining local economies. What would it take to even out which parts of Ontario attract immigrants? Joining us now on that, in Los Angeles, California, Andrew Griffith. He's former Director General at Citizenship and Immigration Canada, now a Fellow of the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. From our studio at Confederation College in Thunder Bay, Charles Sirtwell, President and CEO of the Northern Policy Institute. In Timmins, via Skype, Maggie Mateer, Director of Community Economic Development with the Timmins Economic Development Corporation. And here in our studio, Efat Ghassemi, Executive Director of the Newcomer Centre of Peel. And Efat, we're happy to have you here in our studio in Toronto, and to our friends in Points Beyond, thanks for joining us all on TVO tonight. We want to get a better sense of how, if possible, we can convince newcomers not all to come to the Greater Golden Horseshoe, but rather to fan out and populate parts of Ontario which are suffering from underpopulation right now. So, Charles, let me start with you. What's your best advice on how to help make that happen?
So I think that really all we need is an opportunity to make the case for rural and northern immigration. I think when we look at what's gone on in places like Manitoba, it's worked very well with what's called regionalization. The idea that if you've got 10,000 seats set aside for a particular province, you make sure that 2,000 or 3,000 of those are set aside for the smaller population areas outside the big centers.
Maggie, how about in Timmins? What's the effort that you make to ensure that not everybody comes down here, but that you get your piece of the action as well?
Well, one of the things we're trying to do is work as a region so that we can leverage the resources that we have. All of our communities up here are fairly small. We have limited resources, and so a couple of us have worked together to try and share resources so that we can attend job fairs and immigrant gatherings in Southern Ontario to try and convince them that there's a quality of life factor as well as employment opportunities up here that we'd like them to consider.
Andrew, just let's do a bit of background before I put the same kind of question to you. What did you do when you were at Citizenship and Immigration?
Well, I worked on citizenship issues, citizenship policy, and the requirements for citizenship, as well as sort of multiculturalism issues in terms of how well the different communities and different individuals in Canada work and live together. So that was my policy background rather than strict immigration policy per se.
Understood. Now tell me this, do you think it is a valuable goal to try to ensure that when newcomers come to the province of Ontario, they don't all just come to the areas around Toronto?
I think it's a valid goal. I think it's a needed goal because one hears the voices from the rural areas in terms of how the communities are declining and labor needs are unmet. I think the thing is that one also has to sort of realize that the primary motivation that will pull people to those regions is probably the offer of a job.
And therefore, we need more job creation in points beyond Toronto to make that happen.
I think that's probably the main driving force. And of course, there is a bit of a, one can argue that if you have more people, you'll have more demand, therefore more employment opportunities. But I think immigrants, when they're looking to come to Canada, apart from obviously refugees and family class, they're looking for better economic opportunities than they have in their country of origin.
Okay. Efat, what's your mission at the Newcomer Centre of Peel?
Well, 3 years ago, we decided to bring an initiative to our all full of services that we provide in Mississauga, in Peel. And that was an initiative that we took care of it, and we named it as REI, Rural Employment Initiative, and then we asked Ontario Trillium Foundation to give us some resources to just started to test the water.
So this Rural Employment Initiative, what are you trying to get done there?
So we wanted to see whether we can encourage our newcomers who come to and knock the door and who come to us asking for help, any kind of settlement and employment and other stuff that they need to start to just settle down and integrate into our society, to get them ready to go to rural area, because we felt that they are suffering, really suffering, because there's not much done in terms of getting newcomers immediately or within 6 months.
And how's it going?
And then it's going well right now. After 3 years, we've been working with Timmins, we've been working with Thunder Bay, Northern Ontario, with 60 more counties and small cities, and then we asked them to post their jobs and give it to us, and then we as human connector to get the newcomers go to these smaller cities.
And how many, can you give us a sense of numbers? How many people have actually done this?
So far, I can give you the number, at least more than 2,000 of immigrants. We encourage them to just apply and then go. But in terms of settling down and then get the really matching skills jobs, maybe around 90 people, 90 families, 90.
90 families.
Yeah.
Okay, Charles, let me get you to critically analyze the program, whether you think it's doing what needs to be done and your view of that number.
So from my perspective, I as I said just before we came on air, the Newcomer Center Appeal is one of my favorite places because they're doing the work that needs to be done in terms of working with the people who are in the GTA to move outside of it, because they never should have gone to the GTA in the first place. There are jobs, opportunities, not just quality of life the way that Maggie was talking about, but jobs that pay, in many cases, the same, similar, or even better wages than people can make in the GTA. And those wages go much, much farther when you look at communities like Thunder Bay or Timmins, or even some of our smaller communities like Elliott Lake, for example. The challenge, of course, when you're making this kind of policy is to recognize that you are going to be talking small numbers. And so from the perspective of keeping the federal and provincial governments interested in these kind of investments, it really becomes a challenge. 2,000 people being exposed to moving outside the GTA is a huge move forward from zero just 3 years ago. And those 90 families, you have to remember that we're not just talking about convincing people to move to someplace just because we've given them an incentive or we've encouraged them to move. We want them to find a place where they're going to be happy and they're going to stay. And so I think the Newcomer Center Appeal does a really good job putting in the hard work that's required to actually make a connection that's going to be long-lasting. Andrew,
what's your view of that number?
Well, I think it's a realistic number. And I think one of the things that one always has to look at when we're looking at immigration in terms of there are going to be the large macro numbers for Canada as a whole. And so what percentage of that number can we reasonably expect to encourage to consider smaller communities? And equally important, how do we ensure that those who we succeed in attracting to those smaller communities and those economic opportunities, that they stay, that retention becomes an issue, because if they're not happy with their employment prospects, or if their families aren't happy, after a number of years they may move away and go back to the center. But I think these kind of initiatives that are sort of small scale, I would say sort of, they have realistic expectations in terms of how many people they can attract, the supports that are needed. I think those are really good ways forward sort of to experiment, to pilot different approaches that increase rural immigration to rural areas, but do it in a way that actually can show concrete results over time. And I think, numbers may appear small, but as Charles was sort of alluding to, in the context of where we were 2 or 3 years ago, it's actually significant.
Well, let me put those, Maggie, maybe you'll help me put those numbers in perspective, because of course, we're sitting right now, Efatan and I, in the middle of a city of nearly 3 million people. So when we hear 2,000 people are moving to points beyond, that doesn't sound like a very big number, but how does it play in Timmins?
We recognize that we can't be attracting hundreds and hundreds of newcomers right now, because one of the biggest aspects of this that doesn't get a lot of attention is how do you work with those immigrants once they reach the communities? The cost to mobilize the community and work with newcomers to help retain them is fairly substantial, and it takes a lot of organization. So what the Peel Newcomer Center is doing, I think, is fantastic. It's a start at where we need to be, and it's helping us understand what the needs are and where the gaps are in our communities so that we can better prepare for larger numbers to come. And we're hoping that the government is looking carefully at policies that will facilitate that and maybe even incentivize somehow newcomers to land here first rather than doing secondary migration from a larger community.
Well, let me pick up on that with Charles. What's one change in policy the government of either Canada or Ontario could implement that would enhance what we're talking about here tonight?
So I think we've actually already seen the announcement on the federal side. They've launched what they're calling their Northern and Rural Immigration Pilot. They can do up to 2,750 principal applicants across, well, basically Western Canada, so Ontario and West. And what they've done is they've basically said that those spots are going to be set aside for communities outside of large population centers. And they've also recognized that, frankly, the labor market in these centers is not the same as the labor market in Toronto or Vancouver, that in many cases the middle skilled and the skilled jobs are really the principal areas where immigrants can come, find immediate employment and sustain their families. And so that pilot actually is on a fairly aggressive timeline. They're talking about having applications from communities by the 1st of March. They're talking about selecting communities sometime in May and having the first arrivals on the ground in June or July of this year. From my perspective as a policy analyst on the outside looking in, I certainly wouldn't want to be in those corner offices trying to make that timeline, but I certainly applaud it. And I hope that the province takes a serious look at what the feds have decided to do around focusing on that regionalization and tweaking the rules to fit the actual labor market that's on the ground in these communities, as opposed to saying, well, we're going to give you a part of the normal stream. All you need to do is compete for software engineers and those kind of things, which, frankly, we don't need software engineers in Elliott Lake.
Now, I don't want to sound like a killjoy here, but again, and Andrew, let me go to you on this. We take I think it's about 300,000 new immigrants every year in Canada, and we're talking about 2,700 here in this new rural immigration policy that the feds have come up with. So that's not even 10%. What do we think about that number, Andrew?
Well, I mean, I get back to my earlier comments is it probably is a realistic number to start with. I mean, what we've seen with a similar approach in Atlantic Canada is you start small, you learn, and then the next year you perhaps can increase the numbers. And I think there's, in one sense, yeah, it's a tiny number. It's less than 1%.
Less than 1%, yeah.
But if it's significant in terms of the communities themselves, which are smaller communities, and if it helps all the people involved, whether it be the government people, whether it be economic development agencies, whether it be the settlement services agencies like Peel, we learn from that, and then maybe the next year we can ramp it up. So, maybe I'm too much of a former bureaucrat, but I sort of like these kind of incremental approaches where we test things, we see what works, we talk to people, and then we adjust and increase accordingly.
Efat, what's your view on the efficacy of this rural immigration policy?
Well, I think the government of Canada started to just put out CFA, call for proposal, as I heard from Charles. I think they are picking up this initiative, rural employment and rural area phenomenon. I think that's a very, very good move. But policymakers is, we have to wait for another 10 years to 15 years, but we are practically working and doing it, which is nice, actually. So then they will learn through our experiences and what we do on the ground, and then they see the experiences of the settlement agencies like Newcomer Central P, that what we did and the outcome of this kind of life and moving people from metropolitan and populated cities like Toronto, or we're talking about only 3 cities in Canada that every immigrant knows the name is Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. Right. We don't know anything else, so we just come and then landed and then we stay there.
Can I ask you a personal question about this?
Sure.
Okay, you're I think the one person here of our group tonight that was not born in Canada.
Absolutely.
Have I got that right, everybody?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
You're born in Iran. You came here 30 years ago.
Yes.
When you came here, where did you first settle when you came to Canada?
I first settled in Brampton because I had one family in Brampton. They came to the airport, Pearson Airport, and took us to Brampton. So that's how we landed in Brampton.
That's how you ended up in Brampton.
Yes. And then after, we decided to go to Mississauga. And then we stayed in Mississauga
And the airport,
forever.
the airport's in Mississauga.
The airport is very close to Mississauga.
So here's the question. Do we need new immigrants to come into a place that is not Pearson Airport? Do we need them to land in Canada somewhere else so that their journey towards becoming Canadians potentially starts somewhere else?
I think so. That's the whole concept of rural area, rural phenomenon. We have to really encourage from pre-arrival and then talk to them. And we are connected with some agencies that they do pre-arrival to just get the immigrants ready to come when they have their own permanent residency and all this documentation done. So we encourage them to talk about rural area. And then when they come to the Pearson or other big airports in the cities, we have to really encourage them to just think about to relocate, to go to the rural area. So now we are connecting them. Let's see if they come to Mississauga because they had a family or friends that they said, come, we take care of you for the first months. Then they come and knock our doors. And then we started to have a conversation. And then we started to negotiate with the employers. Just recently, we sent 2 families to Timmins to do the accounting. And then they are so happy right now with the work that they do. But if we don't do it, they don't know where Timmins is or Grey County is or Thunder Bay is. So we have to do this.
So let me ask Andrew about this. Do we have a problem in as much as the first place people land, new Canadians land, or potential new Canadians land, is almost always, Union Station or Pearson Airport, and therefore they stay here? Is there another point of entry that can change this equation somehow?
Well, I mean, the reality of the air travel industry is people are going to land at Pearson or Montreal. That's the reality. But I think the question it becomes, again, if you can actually, like a lot of the immigration, well, the majority of the immigration is economic class immigration, people who come for economic reasons and are evaluated through the point system and everything like that. And you also have the programs that the provinces administer they're allowed to nominate immigrants. So I really think the more that can be done sort of pre-arrival that is related to concrete job offers that pulls people to where the economic opportunities, and the more awareness that can be done before people arrive when they're starting to looking for that or when they're applying. And of course, you get additional points if you actually have a concrete job offer. I think that's where we really have to concentrate on. And I think the work, again, that EFAT does in terms of people who have arrived and are disappointed in what the opportunities are in the GTA, I think that's also crucial because you don't want people to be disaffected immigrants, but if they can sort of say, okay, well, maybe we move somewhere else and we'll find opportunities there.
Let me try this with you, Maggie. How difficult is it to persuade, let's say, for example, people in Timmins that having neighbors who may not look like them or who may not speak English as well as they do or French as well as they do is a good thing for their city?
We're working on an education campaign that's going to try and promote greater understanding and welcoming of newcomers. But for the most part, we've actually had very little trouble with that. We do, of course, have people who are unemployed and seeking jobs, and there will always be some who mistakenly believe that newcomers may be taking jobs from them. But the reality is we're finding that the people who are posting for jobs, employers, the people who are looking for jobs, there's a skills mismatch. And so we need newcomers to try and fill those. And I think we're getting more and more understanding of that skills gap in the community at large. And employers are starting to realize, hey, this is really something we need to pay attention to. Our local community college just welcomed 500 newcomers from Southeast Asia. They're foreign students studying here. And we've had fantastic welcoming of those students. They've been accepted into the community. They've become part of the community at large. They're doing things, they're out and about. And I've been really encouraged by that reception that the students have seen.
Charles, maybe you could help us as well with what's myth and what's reality. The stereotype or the sort of conventional wisdom is that new immigrants from different parts of the world will have a more difficult time adjusting to life in, say, Northern Ontario than they would, for example, in the Greater Toronto area. You want to speak to that?
So I think that comes down to a question about who the immigrants are, where they come from, the communities that they're going to. To be honest, I've moved around the country myself, and I've had a chance in the last 5 years to spend some time with some community members who have come to Thunder Bay, come to places like Scarborough, which is just outside of Thunder Bay, and Terrace Bay, where a large Indian community is now kind of burgeoning because the mill was purchased by an Indian parent company. And again, it's very similar stories, whether they're in Mississauga, Brampton, or downtown Toronto, versus Scarborough or Terrace Bay. You all need to figure out where the hairdresser is, how you access particular types of food, where the best places to go to get your car serviced are. And quite frankly, I think that northern communities are just as good, if not better than, in some cases, the GTA in doing that. And I'll give you a specific example. I think part of the reason why we're seeing this federal experiment with rural and northern immigration is because of the success that we had as communities outside of the GTA in response to the refugee crisis. We had communities from Timmins to Timiskaming Shores to Kenora coming to the forefront, welcoming these refugees in, moving them almost immediately out of temporary housing into their own housing, helping them find jobs, securing them places in schools, welcoming them to local hockey teams, local basketball teams, local craft markets, and it was comparatively speaking hugely successful in the rest of Ontario compared to, you know, the long lines and the difficulties and the negative reports we're hearing from Montreal and Toronto about the refugees still in hotels 8, 10, 12 months hence.
Interesting. Okay, this program tries not to shy away from controversial issues, even though it sometimes gets us in trouble. So I'm going to put something out there. I'm not taking a position on this, but I'm going to put this idea out there, and I'd like the four of you to opine on it if you would. Given that we have a problem in Southern Ontario with potentially too much population, whereas we have the exact opposite problem in rural and Northern Ontario with not enough population, Andrew, you first. Do you think it is a viable and legal option to say to potential new immigrants to Canada, we'll take you in, but you have to go live in either rural or Northern Ontario for 5 years? You can't just come to Brampton, Mississauga, Toronto, Pickering, Ajax, whatever. You've got to go up north. Can we do that?
Okay, so we're now in charter territory.
Yep.
And we're in the question of the mobility rights provisions of the charter, which basically say that you're free to move within Canada, and it applies to both citizens and permanent residents. And it's also a provision that is not covered by the notwithstanding clause. So within that overall context, are there ways that you could sort of, if not completely require, nudge people in the direction?
I'm not talking about nudging. I'm talking about requiring.
Okay, requiring. Okay. So if you require, this is a provision that has never been tested in the courts, to my knowledge. So we don't really know if, let's say, if the Ontario government put a requirement saying for the first 5 years or so, you have to live in a rural community. Well, there are two issues with that. First of all, it would be challenged, probably. And the second issue, of course, if they become citizens after 3 years, that provision would no longer apply. So it would be so in any case, it would probably be limited to the permanent resident category. I think it would probably be tested against, is it a reasonable condition? And you wouldn't do it for everybody because the rural communities couldn't absorb the numbers that we're talking about. But I think you could look at elements of maybe in the point system. You could give extra points if you're locating sort of outside of one of the major urban centers.
No, but again, you're nudging there. You're nudging there, Andrew. I'm talking about more than that.
Because I don't think it would, I don't think you could get away with sort of saying it's an absolute requirement. And I guess it may be my bias is more you want the pull factors and everything like that. And I think the other thing that applies here. If you can get more people to go there through employment opportunities, and if the communities can do a good job in helping them fit in and stay, that may be more effective. But again, I think it's a valid thing to sort of look at what are the possibilities, and I think probably if you go too far in terms of require, you may get some legal challenges. If you go part way by saying for the first year or two, if there's more time-limited provision, or if it's sort of preference given to those with a job offer in rural Canada, that's probably less likely to be challenged.
Okay,
But
let me get some of the other folks in on this as well. Efat, I want to ask you just very directly, do you think it's a good idea to say to potential new Canadian immigrants, we're happy to have you here, and let's not say 5 years, let's say just 3.
3 years.
We're happy to have you here, but if you want to come, you got to go move to and fill in the blank, whatever rural or northern community you want. You got to stay there for 3 years, period, full stop. And if you don't, we kick you out. Is that an option?
Well, I don't know about the kick you out, but
Well, that's the deal.
But I think, in my opinion, you know, the freedom of movement, which is very nice, it's just a democratic way of living. But I think we as an immigrants and a skilled worker, we need some guidance. And then I always say we have to really push a little bit to teach and to educate newcomers before they come, to make some decision that there are jobs available on this rural area or smaller city. And then it's better for you to just go and then match with their employers. And there should be some organization working here to match them and to get them. But there is I think there should be a grandfather clause on any policy that we have on under immigration, that you should really push immigrants to think about relocating them and their families to the rural area. And after 3 years, believe me, if the welcoming cities and the smaller cities really welcome them and embrace them, the whole family, partners and children and schools and everything,
they'll stay.
They will not go anywhere. They stay. I have particularly experienced with very high-level skilled doctors into Winnipeg. We sent many Iranian families, doctors to Winnipeg. They stayed for 10 years and they don't want to move. And then when I met them, they said, Winnipeg opened the door to us and we wanted to pay it back to this city. And this is really amazing comments that I hear, that people will stay.
All right, let me get Charles on the same thing. Charles, what about it? 3 years, but you got to go live in fill in the blank.
All right, Steve, I hate to disappoint you, but no, we can't force people to do that. We can nudge them, as Andrew has suggested, and I'm all in favor of nudges that we can prove that they work. But Steve, if you're looking for a policy from the federal government that makes somebody do something, I'm all in favor of, let's have a conversation about saying that for the next 3 years, all of the foreign agents for the Immigration and Citizenship Canada are not allowed to talk about Montreal, Vancouver, or Toronto, that they have to talk about only communities outside. I'll take that for the next 3 years. Deal?
Well, first of all, I don't have a dog in this hunt, so you don't have to make a deal with me. But you sound like you're from the school of nudge again, as opposed to the school of here's how it's going to be.
So, and I'll tell you why. From my perspective, I don't think we need to force people to live in these communities. I think all of these communities, and I've been to or lived in many of them, can make that case all on their own. We just need an opportunity to compete on what we call an even playing field. Right now, the planes land in 3 places. Everybody gets off the plane and they pretty much stay right there. I think that having the opportunity to do some of that pre-arrival stuff that Andrew was talking about works. Here in Thunder Bay, the Northern Policy Institute has what we call an international matchmakers program. We sent one of those matchmakers in partnership with the Société économique de l'Ontario to Destination Canada in Paris and Brussels. We ended up with 600 people who were interested interested not in moving to the GTA, but in moving to Thunder Bay, Kenora, Rainy River, Fort Francis, because the jobs that were available there were jobs that were of interest to them, and the communities were of a size and of a nature that they were familiar with, that looked like home to them. And that, I think, would have far more impact than saying, if you land at Pearson, you got to get on the next shuttle to whatever location that plane's going to.
Well, Charles, humor me anyway, because I'm going to put the question to Maggie, because she hasn't had a chance to weigh in on this yet. Maggie, what if the government of Canada were to say to the next 1,000 refugees that arrive on our shores, we'd be delighted to take you, but you got to move to Timmins?
Well, to me, that's a real charter issue. And just from a psychological perspective, I think commitment is far more important than compliance when it comes to something like this. We're uprooting people from overseas. Often it's not necessarily their choice to leave their home country. And I think to remove that other bit of choice from them is not conducive to a long-term relationship with those families. And what we found is that if people can get here, we can usually work with them so that the retention rates are higher. We've got a long-term retention rate that's actually quite good. But I don't think starting off on the wrong foot like that by insisting on a compliance approach is going to be the way to build roots in the community.
And let me just circle back with Andrew on one of the first things you said about this. You said, Andrew, if I understood you properly, that if any future government of Canada wanted to put in place a law like this, saying, if you come, we will take you, but you've got to live for X number of years in such and such a place, you say that that would be challenged by the Charter. And do I have this right, that the use of the notwithstanding clause by any government to say, notwithstanding the mobility rights in the Constitution, we're setting those aside and we're forcing you to do this, you can't do that. Is that right?
That's correct.
Huh. So this is a non-starter, is what all four of you are telling me. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, I would nuance that a bit to say there may be some scope to nudge people.
You love that word nudge.
Yeah, I know you hate that word nudge,
No,
but
I don't
it's
hate
the
it.
kind of thing, like, for example, if you give people additional points for locating in a rural area, that may not be challenged. That may be considered
Right.
a reasonable policy measure.
Right. I guess
Let's
what I'm
also
trying to...
not forget that.
Go ahead, Charles.
Sorry. Well, I was going to say, you know, there's also the ability right now for private employers to do this kind of incentivizing, right? So they can say, you know, we'll pay your housing, we'll pay your moving costs, we'll give you an extra X percentage to locate to the community, and if you leave before that certain time is up, then you have to pay it back. So there's those kind of things that private employers are able to do under the law.
Right. I guess, Charles, as a follow-up, I hear, and you've been on this program before talking about it, and of course we've talked to many others about it as well, that there is a crisis of out-migration in northern and rural Ontario right now, a crisis that 50 years from now, some of the cities and towns that we traditionally think of as being absolutely fundamental to parts of this province outside the south may not even be there anymore. And so I've thrown a, you know, for argument's sake, a outside-the-box idea on the table, and I don't know, you tell me, is the situation not grave enough that this kind of out-of-the-box thinking can be rejected?
So I would agree with you that there's a population crisis. Whether we've got an out-migration crisis or not is another one of those nuanced things that Andrew and I could talk about for several years. I think what you're hearing, simply put, is that this particular idea is outside the boundaries of what's legally allowable in Canada, and we can't necessarily go there. But that doesn't mean that outside the box thinking isn't valuable. And I think that, well, let me rephrase. I don't think we need to think outside the box. We know what works to get people to move to rural communities. We've done it successfully in other areas across the country. The simple fact is that in Ontario, we haven't followed those rules. We haven't recognized the fact that by setting aside a particular number that allows communities like Timmins or Thunder Bay or Sault Ste. Marie to make their pitch, to get out of the noise and the bright lights of Toronto, to make their pitch directly to individuals who would be happy in those communities, is the way forward on success. And until we try that, and we haven't, until we try that, you know, trying to change the laws so that we can force people to go where we want them to go, it's probably too much of a stretch, I guess.
We have been happy to have all four of you pitch away on our program here on TVO tonight. So thanks to Andrew, Charles, Maggie, and Efat for joining us here on the agenda. It's been great to have you on. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.